The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. King Scitrax, ruler of the mighty Xerthian Empire, had issued a shocking decree. His daughters must marry a human. For centuries, the Xerthians had been one of the most advanced and powerful alien races, their empire stretching across multiple star systems. They were tall, strong, and known for their unmatched combat skills. Humans, in their eyes, were small, fragile, and unremarkable. So why would their mighty king demand such an alliance? The announcement caused an uproar among the Xerthian High Council. Many alien nobles whispered among themselves, suspicious of the king's decision. Some believed it was a strategy to form diplomatic ties with Earth. Others suspected there was a deeper reason, one the king had not revealed. But while the aliens debated, one human's life was about to change forever. Earth, the selection. Daniel Carter had no idea that his name had been chosen. He was an ordinary engineer, working long hours in a mechanic shop on Earth. His life was simple: fixing machines, drinking coffee, and dreaming about traveling the stars. Unlike most, he admired aliens and always wished to visit another planet. One evening, after a long day at work, Daniel collapsed onto his old couch, scrolling through the news on his tablet. That's when he saw the headline: Xerthian King orders his daughters to marry a human. Selected candidates to be announced soon. Daniel chuckled. Imagine that. Me married to an alien princess. He shook his head and went to grab a drink. But as soon as he stepped into his kitchen, a loud knock came at his door. Bam, bam, bam. Frowning, Daniel walked over and peeked through the peephole. His breath caught in his throat. Standing outside were three figures in dark armored suits, their glowing blue eyes staring straight at him. They weren't human. Daniel Carter, one of them, spoke in a deep, robotic voice. You have been selected by royal decree. You must come with us. Daniel blinked. What? Before he could react, the ground shook beneath his feet. A bright blue light surrounded his entire body, and in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The journey to Xerthia. Daniel awoke inside a strange, metallic room. The air was cool, the walls glowing faintly with a soft purple light. His body felt weightless for a moment, then heavy again as artificial gravity kicked in. He wasn't on Earth anymore. The door in front of him slid open with a smooth hiss, revealing a tall, armored Xerthian standing in the doorway. The alien's sharp silver skin reflected the light, his deep violet eyes scanning Daniel from head to toe. Welcome to the royal ship, Luminar. You are now under the jurisdiction of the Xerthian Empire, the alien stated. Daniel took a shaky breath. Can someone explain why I'm here? The alien tilted his head slightly. By the will of King Scitrax, you have been chosen as a potential suitor for his daughters. You will be taken to the Xerthian Palace, where the princesses will determine if you are worthy. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't a joke. It was real. He had been chosen, randomly, to marry an alien princess. This must be a mistake, he muttered. I'm just an engineer. I'm not a prince, a soldier, or whatever you guys expect. The king's decree is absolute, the Xerthian guard replied. Your qualifications do not matter. You were chosen. You will obey. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. This was insane. Completely, unbelievably insane. But something in the alien's serious tone told him there was no escaping this. The ship rumbled as it began its descent. The door beside Daniel opened, revealing a massive planet below, a world bathed in silver blue light, its towering cities stretching toward the sky like jagged crystals. Daniel stared in awe. Xerthia, the home of the alien king, the home of the three princesses, and now, his new reality. A deep silence filled the royal hall as Daniel stared at the arena below. His heart pounded. A combat trial. He wasn't a fighter. He was an engineer. King Scitrax raised his hand. Let the trial begin. Before Daniel could protest, the ground beneath him shifted. The floor opened, and he dropped straight into the arena below. Daniel landed hard on the sandy ground, coughing as dust rose around him. He pushed himself up, looking around. The arena was massive, surrounded by towering stone walls. Scythian nobles and warriors watched from above, their glowing eyes fixed on him. A loud metallic door on the far side of the arena slid open with a deep groan. From the shadows, a massive warrior stepped out. Daniel versus the Xerthian warrior. The Xerthian fighter was easily 7 feet tall, covered in thick armor with glowing energy veins running through it. His sharp black and silver skin gleamed under the arena lights. In his hand, he held a giant energy staff, crackling with power. Daniel swallowed hard. "I am so dead," the warrior's deep voice echoed. "I am Koreth, the king's champion. You, human, must prove your worth. Fight." Daniel's mind raced. He had no weapons, no armor, and no idea how to fight a trained alien warrior. Koreth charged forward, swinging his massive staff. Daniel barely dodged, rolling to the side. The staff slammed into the ground, sending a shockwave through the arena. The crowd murmured. Viara smirked. "He won't last long." Selah, watching from above, leaned forward. "Come on, Daniel." Outthinking the enemy, Daniel staggered to his feet, breathing hard. "I can't fight him with strength. I need to think." Koreth charged again. This time, Daniel ducked under the staff and ran. The warrior laughed. "You can't run forever, human." Daniel wasn't running. He was observing. He noticed that Koreth's armor had glowing weak points at the joints. When Koreth swung again, Daniel sidestepped, then grabbed a handful of sand from the ground and threw it straight into Koreth's face. The warrior stumbled back, blinded for a moment. The crowd gasped. Daniel didn't hesitate. He rushed forward and kicked Koreth's leg, right at the weak joint. The massive warrior collapsed to one knee. Lorana raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. He's using intelligence instead of brute force." Viara crossed her arms, annoyed. "He got lucky." Turning the tables, Koreth growled and swung wildly, but Daniel kept moving, dodging each attack by inches. He noticed that every time Koreth missed, his energy staff sparked, releasing a small surge of unstable energy. Daniel grinned. That's it. The next time Koreth swung, Daniel jumped backward, causing the warrior to hit the arena wall instead. The impact sent a burst of energy back into Koreth's armor, making him stagger from the shock. The crowd erupted into murmurs. A human was outsmarting the Xerthian warrior. The final move. Daniel saw his chance. While Koreth was off balance, he grabbed the fallen energy staff. It was heavier than he expected, but he planted his feet and swung with all his strength, aiming for Koreth's exposed chest plate. The staff connected, and a powerful shockwave surged through the warrior's armor. Koreth fell backward, landing hard on the ground. He groaned, unable to rise. Silence fell over the arena. Then, cheers erupted. The aftermath. Daniel stood, panting, still gripping the energy staff. He had won. Koreth, still on the ground, let out a deep chuckle. "You fought well, human. You win." Daniel blinked. "Wait, I won." King Sytrax slowly stood from his throne. "Yes, against all odds, you have proven your worth." Selah clapped, her eyes shining with admiration. Lorana gave a small nod of approval. Even Viara, though annoyed, looked at Daniel with newfound respect. Daniel dropped the energy staff, still catching his breath. "So, what happens now?" The king's eyes glowed. "Now, you shall face the next test." Daniel groaned. "Of course, there's more." Daniel stood in the center of the Xerthian arena, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. The energy staff was still warm in his grip, but his arms felt heavy from the effort. The crowd that once mocked him was now silent in disbelief. High above, King Sytrax observed him with calculating eyes. The three princesses had different reactions. Veyara, the warrior princess, clenched her jaw, her expression unreadable. Lorena, the scholar, tapped her chin, intrigued. Selah, the youngest, smiled with genuine admiration. Daniel sighed, wiping sweat from his forehead. Okay, I passed your test. Now what? The king's voice boomed across the arena. Your trial is not over, human. There is one more test. Daniel groaned. Seriously? What now? Wrestling a space dragon? The crowd murmured at his words, confused by his sarcasm. The king, however, raised his hand, and the arena floor beneath Daniel shifted once more. The truth revealed. The ground rumbled, and a massive holographic display flickered to life. A strange symbol appeared, an ancient marking Daniel didn't recognize. Lorena stepped forward. Do you know what this is, human? Daniel frowned. Alien art. She narrowed her eyes. This is the mark of the blood curse. The crowd gasped. Even Daniel could feel the weight of the words. Selah hesitated before speaking. Our royal bloodline has been under a curse for centuries. No Xerthian prince or princess has ever produced an heir without suffering. A terrible fate. Daniel's stomach tightened. And what does that have to do with me? The king stepped forward, his gaze intense. It is written in the ancient texts. A child of the stars, from the distant blue world, shall break the chain of fate. Daniel blinked. Wait, are you saying humans can break this curse? Lorena nodded. That is why my father issued the decree. He does not just seek an alliance. He seeks to save his bloodline. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about diplomacy or tradition. It was about survival. A secret threat. Before Daniel could process this, a loud explosion shook the palace. Boom! The walls trembled, and suddenly, a group of armored Xerthians stormed into the arena. Their leader, a tall, cloaked figure, pointed straight at Daniel. Seize the human. Guards rushed toward him, their weapons glowing. What the hell? Daniel shouted, instinctively dodging to the side. Veyara leaped down from her place above, landing in front of him. You will not take him, she growled, drawing her twin energy blades. Lorena activated a shield barrier, while Selah clung to Daniel's arm. This is a coup, she whispered. Daniel's mind raced. This wasn't just a test anymore. Someone wanted him gone. Fighting back. Veyara charged forward, clashing blades with the attacking warriors. Sparks flew as the metal hummed with energy. Lorena used her shield to deflect energy blasts, while Selah guided Daniel behind a pillar for cover. Daniel peeked out. Okay, does this happen often? Selah's voice was serious. No, someone is trying to stop the prophecy. Daniel exhaled sharply. Great, so now I'm not just an engineer, I'm also a galactic target. A guard broke through the defenses and lunged toward Daniel. Instinct took over. Daniel grabbed a fallen staff and swung hard, knocking the guard back. Another attacker rushed in, but Selah, surprisingly, moved in front of Daniel, her eyes glowing with power. A wave of purple energy pulsed from her hands, sending the enemy flying backward. Daniel stared at her, wide-eyed. You can do that. Selah blushed slightly. Only in emergencies. The battle ends. More royal guards arrived, overwhelming the attackers. The coup was failing. The cloaked leader, realizing they were losing, retreated into the shadows, vanishing before anyone could stop them. The chaos ended as quickly as it began. The king stepped forward, his expression grim. This confirms my fears, he said. There are those who would rather see our empire fall than accept a human into our bloodline. Veyara sheathed her blades, looking at Daniel for the first time without hostility. You fought well, for a human. Lorena adjusted her glasses. Perhaps you are not as useless as I assumed. Selah simply smiled. I knew you were special. Daniel sighed. Yeah. Can I get a break now? The king's deep voice interrupted him. No. Now, you must choose. Daniel froze. Choose what? The king looked at his 3 daughters. One of them. The entire palace fell silent. Daniel stood frozen as King Sigtrax's words echoed through the royal hall. Now, you must choose. The Xerthian nobles, warriors, and even the palace guards all turned to stare at him. The weight of the king's demand hit him like a shockwave. Daniel gulped. Wait, choose. What do you mean choose? The king's piercing violet eyes locked onto him. You must decide which of my daughters will be your future partner. Daniel's stomach twisted. He barely knew these princesses, and yet the entire fate of an empire seemed to rest on his decision. The sisters react. Princess Veyara, the warrior princess, scoffed and crossed her arms. Ha! He has not earned the right to choose me. Her golden eyes narrowed. But I will not back away from the challenge if he proves himself worthy. Princess Lorana, the scholar, adjusted the holographic tablet in her hands. The logical choice would be me, she said, analyzing him like a specimen. I am the most intelligent. If a human must be part of this empire, he should stand beside someone who understands strategy. Princess Selah, the youngest, bit her lip and looked at Daniel with gentle eyes. I don't think he should be forced to decide so soon, she said softly. Maybe he needs time to understand us better. Daniel exhaled sharply. That's a good idea. Can we go with that? The king remained silent for a long moment before nodding. Very well. You will spend time with each of them. By the end of 3 days, you must choose. Daniel rubbed his temples. What kind of insane reality am I living in? Day 1. The warrior's test. Veyara wasted no time. The very next morning, she dragged Daniel to the royal training grounds. This is where real warriors are made, she declared. If you cannot fight beside me, you are useless to me. Daniel groaned. Can't we start with something simple? Like lifting weights? Veyara smirked. This is simple. Before he could react, she threw a training spear at him. He barely caught it before she lunged forward, attacking with full force. Daniel yelped and dodged. What the hell? I thought this was training. This is training, she shouted, swinging again. If you want to stand beside me, you must prove you can survive. For the next hour, Daniel did his best to dodge, block, and counter her relentless strikes. She was faster, stronger, and way more skilled. Every time he thought he had an opening, she would smirk and knock him down again. By the time they finished, Daniel was covered in sweat and bruises. Veyara looked at him, arms crossed. You're not strong, she admitted, but you don't give up. Daniel groaned, lying on the ground. Great. I'll put that on my tombstone. For the first time, Veyara laughed. A small, genuine laugh. Maybe you're not as weak as I thought. Day 2, the Scholar's Challenge. Lorana was the complete opposite of her sister. Instead of fighting, she took Daniel to a massive library filled with ancient Xerthian records. You want to be part of this empire? She asked, tapping her tablet. Then you must prove you are intelligent enough to contribute. Daniel sighed. So what? A test. I'm not great with alien history. Lorana's blue eyes sparkled. This is not history. It is strategy. She placed a holographic chessboard between them. You win, you gain my respect. You lose, well, you prove that humans are nothing but primitive creatures. Daniel squinted. You know, for someone trying to marry a human, you're not exactly charming. She smirked. Prove me wrong. Then. The next 2 hours were filled with intense mind games. Lorana was brilliant, but Daniel was creative. He played unpredictably, making moves that confused her. Finally, after a long pause, she leaned back. You beat me. Daniel grinned. Told you. Humans have a few tricks up their sleeves. Lorana studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, to his shock, she smiled. Maybe this won't be as boring as I thought. Day 3. The Gentle Connection. On the final day, Daniel found himself walking through the palace gardens with Selah. Unlike her sisters, she didn't test him with weapons or intelligence. Instead, she simply talked. "I never liked this tradition," she admitted. "I don't want to force someone to be with me. I just want to be with someone who cares." Daniel looked at her, surprised by her honesty. "You're different from your sisters." She smiled. "Is that bad?" Daniel shook his head. "Not at all." They sat near a small glowing pond, watching strange butterfly-like creatures hover over the water. For the first time in days, Daniel felt calm. "Everyone expects you to choose based on power or logic," Selah whispered. "But I think the heart should decide." Daniel blinked. No one had said that to him before. He looked at her, realizing something. Unlike her sisters, Selah wasn't trying to change him or test him. She just wanted to know him. For the first time, Daniel felt genuinely drawn to one of the princesses. The final decision. As the 3 days ended, Daniel stood before the Xerthian court once again. The king's eyes burned into him. "You have met my daughters. Now, human, choose." Daniel's heart pounded. He looked at Vayara, Lorena, and Selah. One choice could change everything. And in that moment, he knew exactly who he would pick. The royal ship Luminar glided through the sky, descending toward the capital of Xerthia. Daniel stood near the viewing window, staring in awe at the glowing silver-blue cities stretching as far as the eye could see. Towering structures, some shaped like spirals, others like massive crystal formations, shone under the twin moons of Xerthia. Strange flying crafts zipped between buildings, and below, the streets were filled with tall, elegant Xerthians walking in perfect harmony. "This place is unbelievable," Daniel muttered to himself. The Xerthian guard, still standing beside him, gave a small nod. "You are about to enter the royal palace of Zetharian. Be mindful of your actions. You are an outsider among us." Daniel gulped. That wasn't exactly reassuring. As the ship landed smoothly on a wide platform surrounded by glowing blue pillars, the doors hissed open. 2 more heavily armed Xerthian guards gestured for him to follow. He took a deep breath. This is it. No turning back. Entering the Grand Palace, Daniel stepped out of the ship and onto a long, polished walkway leading toward the grandest building he had ever seen. The royal palace looked like a structure from a dream. Massive white and silver spires, flowing blue energy streams running along its walls, and huge statues of past Xerthian rulers standing tall at the entrance. As he walked forward, he could feel hundreds of alien eyes on him. Nobles and warriors stood in the courtyard, watching him with curiosity, some whispering in their strange language. He knew what they were thinking. A human. He looks weak. He cannot be a worthy suitor. This must be a mistake. Daniel clenched his fists but kept his expression calm. He had no idea why he was chosen, but he wasn't going to let these aliens look down on him. Suddenly, a loud, commanding voice echoed through the air. "The human has arrived. Bring him forward." Daniel turned toward the source of the voice and saw a massive figure standing on the palace steps. King Cytrax. The Xerthian king was taller than any alien Daniel had seen so far. His silver-plated armor gleamed in the light, and his deep violet eyes locked onto Daniel with a powerful, unreadable expression. The crown on his head seemed to hum with energy, and his presence alone made the air feel heavy. "Step forward, human. Meet your fate." Daniel swallowed hard and walked toward the throne. This was really happening. The 3 princesses. As Daniel approached, he noticed 3 figures standing beside the king. They were tall, elegant, and undeniably different from each other. The first princess, standing to the king's right, had piercing yellow eyes and a stance like a warrior. She wore dark silver armor, her long, dark hair tied back tightly. Her arms were crossed, and she stared at Daniel like he was an insect beneath her boot. Princess Veyara, the warrior princess. The second princess, in the middle, had calm blue eyes and wore a flowing dark robe adorned with symbols. She held a holographic tablet, analyzing something on its screen without even glancing at Daniel. Her expression was cold and calculating, like a scientist studying an experiment. Princess Lorana, the scholar princess. The third princess, standing to the left, was completely different. Her violet eyes shimmered with curiosity, and she wore a light, elegant robe with golden accents. She seemed smaller than her sisters, and when Daniel met her gaze, she smiled slightly. Princess Stella, the youngest princess. Daniel quickly realized that these three women would decide his fate. First impressions. The king's deep voice boomed across the hall. Human, you stand before my daughters. They will determine if you are worthy to remain here. Daniel let out a slow breath and looked at the three princesses. He had to say something. He took a step forward and tried to sound confident. I didn't ask to be chosen, but since I'm here, I'll prove that humans are more than what you think. Veyara scoffed. Ha! You think you can impress us? You look weak. A soft earth dweller who knows nothing of strength. Daniel clenched his jaw. Strength isn't just about fighting. Lorana raised an eyebrow. An interesting response. Perhaps we should test his intelligence, if he survives long enough. Daniel felt nervous at the way she said if. Before either of them could say more, Selah spoke up. Her voice was softer than her sister's, but there was something genuine in her tone. I think we should at least give him a chance. He's different. I can tell. Her words surprised everyone. The other nobles whispered again. Veyara frowned. Lorana looked intrigued, and the king studied Daniel with unreadable eyes. After a long pause, the king finally spoke. Very well. The human will be tested. The trial begins. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. Tested. How? King Sytrax raised his hand, and the floor beneath Daniel shifted. The center of the throne room opened, revealing a large arena below. The king's deep voice echoed once more. You will face a combat trial. If you fail, you will be sent back to Earth in disgrace. Veyara smirked. Let's see if the human can even survive the first round. Daniel's stomach dropped. He had no idea how to fight an alien warrior, but he was about to find out. A heavy silence filled the royal hall as Daniel stood before King Sytrax, his three daughters, and the watchful eyes of the Xerthian court. The king's deep voice echoed across the grand chamber. You have spent time with my daughters. Now, human, choose. Daniel took a deep breath, his heart pounding. Each princess had tested him in different ways. Veyara, the warrior, had pushed him to his physical limits. Lorana, the scholar, had challenged his intelligence. Selah, the youngest, had spoken to his heart. They were all strong in their own way, but who was the right choice? Daniel looked up, his gaze meeting Selah's soft violet eyes. Unlike her sisters, she had never tried to change him or prove herself superior. She had simply accepted him. I choose Selah, Daniel finally said, his voice steady. A ripple of whispers and gasps spread through the court. Even the king's expression hardened slightly, though he remained silent. Veyara crossed her arms and scoffed. Imph. I expected that, but there was no anger in her voice, only respect. Lorana simply nodded, as if she had predicted the outcome. Interesting choice, human, she murmured. Selah's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly in surprise. Then, after a moment, a warm, genuine smile spread across her face. But before she could speak, the king raised a hand. Very well, Sytrax said. You have made your choice, but his piercing gaze locked onto Daniel. You have one final challenge. Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. Oh, come on, he muttered under his breath. The king stood tall, his presence radiating power. You have proven strength. You have proven intelligence. But to be part of the Xerthian royal family, you must also prove. He paused, and for the first time, there was a hint of something deeper in his eyes. That you are willing to sacrifice for the one you choose. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. Sacrifice. The floor beneath them rumbled, and suddenly, a hidden chamber opened behind the king's throne. A massive crystalline structure emerged, pulsing with ancient energy. Lorana gasped. The trial of binding. Daniel turned to Selah, confusion written on his face. What's that? Selah swallowed. It's a sacred test. It will connect our life force for a brief moment. If our bond is strong, we will both survive. If not. She hesitated, and Daniel felt a cold chill run down his spine. The king's voice was firm. If you truly wish to stand beside my daughter, step forward and prove it. The trial of binding. Daniel took a shaky breath. No pressure, right? He muttered to himself. Selah looked at him, her expression serious. You don't have to do this. If you walk away now, no one will blame you. Daniel met her gaze, then shook his head. I made my choice, Selah. I won't run away now. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face before she gently took his hand. They stepped forward together, standing in front of the glowing crystal. The moment they did, a surge of energy crackled through the air. The court watched in silence as tendrils of golden light wrapped around Daniel and Selah, pulling them closer. Then, pain. Daniel gasped, feeling as though his very soul was being stretched. Memories flashed before his eyes. His childhood, his home on earth, the moment he met Selah. He felt her emotions, her thoughts, her fears. He felt her uncertainty, her longing to be seen not just as a princess, but as a person. Selah's body trembled beside him, and suddenly she cried out in pain. Daniel instinctively grabbed her, pulling her close. Selah, stay with me. The light flared brighter, and for a moment, Daniel felt like he was slipping away. But then he focused on her warmth, on her kindness, on the way she had always looked at him with genuine care. He refused to let go. The outcome. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the light vanished. Daniel collapsed onto the floor, breathing hard. Selah fell against him, her fingers clutching his shirt as she gasped for air. Silence filled the hall. Then, a deep, powerful voice spoke. You have passed. Daniel lifted his head to see King Sytrax looking at him, not with coldness, but with something new. Respect. Selah blinked up at him, then smiled. A soft, grateful smile. You did it, she whispered. Daniel let out a weak chuckle. Yeah, no big deal. Just almost lost my soul. That's all. Selah laughed, and for the first time, so did the king. The nobles, warriors, and court officials all bowed their heads. The human has proven himself, Sytrax declared. From this day forth, he is part of our family. Daniel exhaled sharply. Finally, he muttered. Selah squeezed his hand. Welcome to Xerthia, Daniel. For the first time since arriving on this alien world, he felt like he truly belonged. Daniel sat on the cool marble floor of the royal hall, his body still trembling from the trial of binding. The golden energy that had surrounded him and Selah had finally faded, leaving only a quiet hum in the air. He glanced at Selah, who was still leaning against him, her violet eyes filled with relief. She looked exhausted, but there was warmth in her smile. You did it, she whispered again. Daniel let out a breathless chuckle. Yeah, barely. Around them, the Xerthian court stood in stunned silence. The nobles, warriors, and advisors, all of them had doubted him. But now, after witnessing the trial of binding, there was no more room for doubt. He had passed. King Sytrax stepped forward, his deep gaze locked onto Daniel. There was no longer coldness or suspicion in his eyes. Instead, there was something far more surprising: respect. Human. The king spoke, his voice echoing through the chamber. You have proven your strength. You have proven your intelligence. And now you have proven your devotion. He turned to the court. From this day forward, Daniel Carter is one of us. A murmur rippled through the room. Some nobles still looked uncomfortable, but no one dared to speak against the king's decree. Then, to Daniel's shock, the Xerthian warriors bowed their heads, a gesture of honor and acceptance. A new beginning. Daniel slowly got to his feet, still feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He had come to this planet as an outsider, someone who was only here because of a random selection. But now he was part of something greater. Selah stood beside him, her hand still lightly gripping his. She looked up at her father. What happens now? King Scitrax studied Daniel for a moment, then nodded. There will be an official ceremony to recognize this union, but more importantly, his gaze turned toward the gathered nobles. This marks the first true alliance between Xerthia and Earth. The room fell into murmurs again. Daniel blinked. Wait, what? Lorana, who had been silent up until now, adjusted her holographic tablet. You don't realize it yet, do you? He frowned. Realize what? She tapped a few buttons on her device, and a holographic image appeared in the air. It showed Earth and Xerthia, side by side. By proving yourself worthy, she explained, you have set a precedent. Humans and Xerthians are no longer just distant species. This moment will be remembered in history as the day our worlds truly connected. Daniel stared at the glowing display. This was bigger than just him and Selah. The celebration. That night, the royal palace of Xetherian was filled with light, music, and celebration. The entire city was alive with the news. A human had become part of the royal family. Though Daniel still felt out of place, Selah stayed by his side the entire time. She guided him through the grand halls, introducing him to important figures, translating conversations when needed. At one point, Vayara walked up to him, arms crossed. Don't think this means I like you, human. Daniel smirked. Wouldn't dream of it. She stared at him for a moment, then sighed. But you earned my respect today. That's not something many can do. Before he could respond, she clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder, nearly making him stumble. Then she walked off, her posture still stiff, but her expression softer than before. Lorana, who had been watching from a distance, shook her head. I suppose I'll admit it as well. You're not as unremarkable as I first thought. Daniel chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. She gave a small, knowing smile. It was a quiet moment. Later that night, when the celebrations had calmed, Daniel found himself standing on one of the palace balconies, looking over the glowing city below. Selah joined him, her gaze soft. Are you happy? Daniel let out a long breath. I don't know if happy is the right word. It still feels surreal. She nodded. I understand. This is a lot to take in. Daniel turned to her, really looking at her. And you? Are you happy with my choice? Selah hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. Yes, she whispered. Because you didn't choose me for power or logic or because it was expected. You chose me because you wanted to. Daniel felt a warmth spread through him. Yeah, I did. For a moment, they simply stood there, the alien night sky stretching above them. And for the first time since arriving on this world, Daniel felt like he belonged. Epilogue. A new journey begins. In the days that followed, Daniel was officially recognized as part of the royal family. Though he still had much to learn about Xerthian culture, he embraced the challenge. Earth and Xerthia opened new diplomatic discussions, creating the foundation for something greater than either world had ever seen before. And as for Daniel and Selah, well, their story was only just beginning.